Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies. And this is War Panic by the Imperator of AMORC, an article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 29, Number 10, October 1951. The Thought of the Month, War Panic by the Imperator of AMORC. News of the adverse international relations as disseminated by the press and radio not only confuse the public, but at times also cause a mild hysteria. This is particularly notable in North America, which, although it participated in the last two world wars, escaped actual destruction of its homeland. The European populace has memory of the bitter experiences of the last conflict to draw upon in making preparations for a possible new major conflict. In consequence, it is less inclined to conduct, which in effect constitutes panic. One of the common and yet natural queries is, where shall we go to avoid a possible atomic bombing? In the first place, there is no assurance as to where an enemy will strike. The more probable a target appears may perhaps heed the reason why it would not be selected by the enemy. Military strategy, as well as logic, indicates that a nation will do its utmost to safeguard essential industries, large port facilities, and the like. It is in such a place that it will concentrate its strongest counter-air force and its net of radar warning posts. Inasmuch as at the beginning of a conflict, the surprise element is paramount in gaining an advantage and in demoralizing the opposition, the enemy will probably strike where least expected. Fleeing to the mountains and deserts in the interior of a country, as some persons who are motivated by war panic are now doing, is not as good judgment as it may seem. Admittedly, an enemy will not waste expensive material and personnel on bombing semi-desolate areas. The persons who have retreated to such regions will, in the event of actual conflict, be faced by other circumstances not much less devastating than the bombing. Such remote areas within, for example, the United States, do not provide ample food supply. Usually food and other essentials must be transported to them by the means of railroads or by vans or trucks from produce centers. An actual invasion or series of bombings of major cities would immediately disrupt all normal transport of these goods. Available facilities would be concentrated to serve the stricken areas, to provide medical and military supplies. Thus, those in hiding would be forced to leave their retreats for needed commodities. In addition, imposed rationing would make it impossible for them to accumulate an advance or sufficient amount of supplies during the actual emergency. To flee or to serve. Being further realistic, which means an analysis of a probable course of events in such an emergency, those who had sought refuge would be compelled to leave the retreat by government order. Men and women who are able-bodied would be commanded, almost regardless of age, to participate in some capacity to assist in stricken areas. Women would be drafted to hospital duty, notwithstanding any lack of training. Men would be obligated to clear away litter and extinguish fires, as well as to remove those who are stricken and helpless. Obviously, no portion of the populace is going to be permitted, in the event of the circumstances of an actual fight for survival, to shrink its moral duty. The fact that some may have fled to a refuge before the conflict began would make of them no exceptions. Those who would refuse to report for duty, or that it would be disclosed later had not done so, would be considered derelict in their responsibility. They would be subject to severe penalties or imprisonment, if not worse. No intelligent person wants a World War III. Neither side of the factions favors such a plan. It is obviously too extremely dangerous. On the other hand, the elements of pressure which are building up may get beyond the point of control and precipitate such a war. Regardless of who would be the military victor, he would still be the loser. Devastation and chaos would thwart all the success that one might hope would emerge from such a victory. It is apparent then that each human being who thinks and who has the opportunity of converting his thoughts into actions will try to constrain war. It is incumbent upon him to remain as an active and integral part of his present society, not to abandon it. National importance. Politicians down through the centuries have been notably more concerned about their political ambitions than their public charge, namely, the welfare of the nation which they represent. What they often profess to be the best only reflects an attempt to stabilize their own party, its policies and their particular interest. Nevertheless, such politicians are inordinately sensitive to the wishes of their constituents, the voters. Sometimes such sensitivity results in the benefit for the people and for the state, and other times it does not. History is replete with incidents to indicate that the masses have often been working in their demands. But politicians, for their own welfare, continue to keep their collective ears attuned to the public demands. It is, therefore, necessary for you to remain where you can voice, by ballot or by some other medium, an opinion which can influence your political representative to pursue a sane and just course in his legislative functions. Let us assume that the major portion of the civilian populace of a nation would be susceptible to war hysteria, and that it could and would retreat from industries and from food, transport, and other essential centers of activity. This would result in a national impotence. No adequate defense could then be planned or executed. Most modern wars are technological, which means behind every combatant or soldier, there must be many civilian workers. Not all these workers necessarily need to work in armament plants or to make the machinery of war. Your very job, the one you have always been working at, in all probability in the event of war would directly or indirectly be important to your nation. To flee to the mountains or to the desert is to assume that in some way the defense of what you now cherish would be carried on, and that at a later time you could return to resume your previous way of living. Such reasoning is folly. It is desertion from your duty as an integral part of society. It would only result in expediting the ravishing of your nation. It would constitute a guarantee of the extinguishing of all potentialities of a return to normalcy in the future. There are those who might reply, and of what assistance could I be to my fellow citizens if I were suddenly killed by remaining in the area of a probable bomb attack? Your remaining to help prepare for contingencies, as directed by governmental authorities, forestalls the possibility of an open conflict. It at least delays it. An enemy, as part of its psychological warfare, tries every way within its means to demoralize the civil populace. Signs of panic and a retreat of the people are evident to the enemy of internal weakness. They constitute the signal for attack. In the event of actual warfare, you might lose your life by remaining in a large metropolitan or essential area. This is a necessary calculated risk, which you take as a citizen in performing your duty in trying to prevent war or in the defense against attack. Individual responsibility. These remarks are not intended to be chauvinistic, that is, an appeal to blind patriotism. Rather, they seek to set forth the expedient things to do under the present trend of events. Let us not be self-righteous in our thinking as to presume that the events of the day are not our personal responsibility or doing. If we, the peoples of the world, are on the verge of another world war, a considerable portion of the fault for that is ours as individuals. Our indiscriminate world tariffs, our often humiliating immigration restrictions, our economic and political coalitions, our general indifference to the problems of other peoples, our frequent religious bigotry, our often false sense of national supremacy has contributed to the situation that prevails. Our desire to have affluence, money, and personal power before principle, to have comfort before security, and vanity before understanding, have encouraged these adverse developments which have resulted in many quarters in the last 3 decades. We boast that we are a democracy. What have we done with our rights of freedom of thought and action in furthering others than our own national and personal affairs? What have we done in the last 30 years to help improve the general peacetime conditions of the world? We have allowed a tighter fence to be built around our immediate interest, which we call our national boundaries. We have came to think that just that which lies within that fence is our world. Suddenly we have learned that when a fire rages, it does not always stop at the fence, but spreads over it. Had we concerned ourselves more with the true world, realizing how much we, as a people and as a nation, depended upon it economically and politically for our security, some of the dangers now confronting us could have been mitigated. The unity which we frantically seek to accomplish at this time among the nations, so as to still the tidal wave which might engulf us, could have been seriously considered previously. Then there might not have been a tidal wave. To have accomplished this in years past would have meant some sacrifice on the sovereignty of our respective nations. It would perhaps have meant as well the lessening of those standards of living which some of us are enjoying. Not having done these things, there is now the danger of being compelled to ward off a complete loss of sovereignty and a continual reduction of our standards of living for indeterminate time. Mystically, the events of the day are our individual karma. Because of our individual indifference and often thoughtlessness, to retreat now is only to compound the lesson which we must learn. This is our error of the world. It is ours to ruin or to right. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.